Welcome to The Writer's Dream. This is a show where authors can talk about how they write their books, how they publish their books, and how they market their books. My name is Linda Maria Frank, and I am the author of Annie Tillery Mysteries. You can find us on Facebook. The page is called The Writer's Dream. Can you imagine? If you have a question for us, you can message me through that Facebook page. We are also on YouTube. Just search my name, Linda Maria Frank. Click on my picture and the videos will come up. There are about 125 interviews now, and if you are a writer or a reader, you can find some really good tips about good books and about good writing and publishing and marketing. Today is D-Day, one of the most influential, important days in American history. And so we're going to devote the show to D-Day today, and our guests are Jack Bilello, a student of history, and Joe Giannini, who is a combat Vietnam vet, a lawyer, and also a producer of a show here at LTV called Gung Ho. And we also have a special guest, Eden, the service dog. So, gentlemen, let's talk about D-Day. Jack, you want to talk about what you know about D-Day, since you're the student of history?
Yes, D-Day was and still is the day of days. It was that day in which massive forces of American, British, and Canadian troops invaded the continent of Europe, Northwest Europe, and the issue was in doubt. We had almost been driven into the sea in Sicily in the early invasions, in Anzio, in Italy, and so there was no guarantee of success here. And we had amassed maybe some 5,000 planes, ships. About 1,600 planes bombarded the northwest coast, which would be Omaha Beach, Utah Beach, Sword Beach, Gold Beach. And we had 160,000 troops launching the invasion. The invasion was originally scheduled for June 5th, but the weather was so dreadful that it had to be postponed for a day, which was very dangerous. And Dwight Eisenhower, our Supreme Commander, had to make an incredibly fateful decision whether to go or not, whether to launch the invasion. There was a brief period of a couple of hours where the weather was going to let up, and Eisenhower took a fantastic gamble and a risk. And that's what the great commanders do. They take risks. And he said, we'll go. And that invasion was launched. We had, in one day, over 8,000 American casualties, and that was principally at Omaha Beach, which was the bloodbath. In one little town in Virginia, almost the entire town, the boys from that town were wiped out. Bedford, Virginia, 22 boys, and that's about the entire town that was drafted in that small little community. But Eisenhower made an announcement in which he said, servicemen, soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, today we launch a great crusade to liberate Europe from the throes of Nazi tyranny. The fate of the world depends on you. But he also had another letter or note in which, because he was not confident of success, in which he said that note, if this invasion fails, the fault is mine and mine alone. Our men did everything that anyone could ask of them. But thankfully, the invasion gained a foothold, even though it was touch and go. There was one commander by the name of Norman Cota who was marching up and down the beach under heavy fire. There was like 85 German machine gun nests on that beach. And he was saying, get off the beach, get off the beach. There are only two kinds of men who are going to be on this beach today, those who are dead and those who are going to die. So get off the beach. But we got off the beach, and we launched then the liberation of Europe from the utter depravity of Nazi Germany. And that is why D-Day, I think, to me, is one of the key dates in modern American history, if not in world history.
Well, it changed the world. I remember, I guess it was the 50th anniversary, which is now 20 years ago, more 24 years ago. Clinton was president, Bill Clinton was president, and he went to the ceremony, and how he introduced the vets was, these are the men who, when they were young, saved the world. And I'll never forget that, because I thought that was such a fine tribute, and I think it's true. And it was a wonderful thing to say about vets, and it kind of changed the treatment of vets. What do you think about that, Joe?
Well, I think
You could speak to this better than I.
my dad was in the Army during the World War II. I actually have his signature. He was part of the 9th Armored Division. That generation, you know, coming home and transitioning, to me, they were special. I mean, and they were treated like that. Every one of them was treated like a hero, and our government made sure that when they came back, they got incredible benefits. I mean, I hear about it, I see it in movies. In fact, some of the vets, World War II vets that were on this show, mention all the time that they went through college on a GI Bill. And not only that, they were housed, they got everything. Everything was paid for, everything. So those things have changed. Actually, even now, with the way we're viewed by the world, we're not viewed like we were back then. We were really, incredible. We saved hundreds of millions of people from oppression and from dying, and we saved them again before that in the First World War. So it was twice we did that. So it really was, those men and women that came back and had been through that, that was an incredible thing for them and for people around them to, you know, it was.
Well, I think what happens is that was in everybody's mind a just war. It was a war that needed to be fought and had to be to save civilization as far as we were concerned. So what happened to just wars?
Yeah, I think that's the last and best example of a just war. It was a defensive war. We had been attacked. We did everything possible to avoid civilian deaths, unlike Nazi Germany, which preyed and thrived on the death of countless, 60 million people died in World War II. 60 million, that's one person every 3 seconds for 6 consecutive years. It's amazing. Imagine that, Dave. You just say 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Do that for 6 consecutive years and you'll have an idea of what 60 million people are. And it's no accident that the World War II generation has been called the greatest generation, because they had to live through the greatest depression in our country's history. Mm-hmm. And then as a reward for living through in the Great Depression, they had to bleed and suffer and die in the greatest war in all of human history. And Joe, you're absolutely right, that GI Bill of Rights, before the war, about 6% of our population went to college. As a result of the GI Bill of Rights, about 20% went to college. It was a magic carpet ride to the middle class. Mm. We built the best and biggest middle class in the history of any democracy. But unfortunately, that became a thing of the past as future generations had to fight. And your generation, Joe, the Vietnam generation, of course, the thing that we have to learn, and if we hate the war, that's one thing, mm-hmm. but we should always honor the warrior.
Yes.
Hate the war, honor the warrior, and that was not done in the Vietnam War, much to the disgrace of the American nation.
Jack, what about the veterans that came back from Korea?
Yeah, Korean veterans, at a certain point in time, they ended the GI Bill of Rights at a certain point in time. And the Korean veterans, the Korean War is called the Forgotten War. And it was not until rather recently that a monument...
Because there's no peace treaty.
Yeah, it's still no peace treaty. Yeah. And Korean Memorial was put in after the Vietnam Memorial. The Vietnam Memorial was put in about the mid-'80s, and then the Korean War
I've seen it.
was
I
put in
realize that.
sometime afterward. So, and it was called the Forgotten War, and we lost, over 50,000 in Korea, as well as but in Vietnam we lost almost 60,000.
Well, I also think that the American attitude towards war changed in the years after World War II. I mean, let's talk about the United Nations and NATO, and I think if you look back in history, the Europeans were always fighting with each other, the Germans and the French and the Germans, and whoever. And after World War II, there was a change, and because of, I think, the UN and NATO, the Europeans, they stopped fighting with each other. And then our attitude towards war changed.
You're right, Linda, not only did they stop fighting with each other, but we became a grand alliance. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was an alliance to prevent the spread of communism and to unify the Northwestern European allies, which was our most successful alliance perhaps of all. That, along with the Marshall Plan, which rebuilt Europe, the European Recovery Program, was magnificent, and the United States was recognized as the leader of the world. And we did that for a good 70 years. It's a little questionable today if that is going to continue.
Yes, I know. But the Vietnam War kind of changed everything.
When I went to Vietnam, I really didn't know anything about Vietnam. When I first heard that word, I wouldn't be able to find it on the map. And I learned a little bit about what was going on just before I got there, because I read that book by Bernard Fall, Street Without Joy. And it sounded like what we were getting into, or we were into, was much more serious than even the Marines that were going was told. We were being lied to. But I realize now that we got involved in Vietnam probably back in 1955.
Yes.
And all the decisions made us get more involved. They're all wrong decisions for the wrong reasons. And so actually we were there from 1955 to 1975. And I was the generation, when Kennedy said, ask not what you can
Do for
What your country
but
can
what
do
your-
for you, but what you can do for your country.
And guys like me, I was in early 20s. I said, he's asking us to go fight communism. That's how,
That's how our generation
yeah,
looked
it's like, he's asking us to go fight communism. And he really wasn't. I don't think he wasn't doing that.
Well, we were the best and the brightest is what the Kennedy administration was called, and much of it was kept over with the Johnson administration. And they were convinced that there was a theory called the domino theory, which was the presupposing dominant theory of that period of time, that if Vietnam fell to communism, then Burma would fall, and Thailand would fall, and Pakistan would fall, and India would fall. It would be like a domino effect. It was nonsense. It never, ever had any relationship to the truth. As a matter of fact, when the Vietnam War ended, Joe, within the year, Vietnam went to war with China. And they were both communist countries, but they hated each other for 1,000 years. They were rivals.
He also went to war with France, came back in.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't think Roosevelt wanted that.
No, no.
The French were allowed back into Vietnam and right after the war to recolonize it. Is that crazy?
Yeah.
Recolonize it. And we were behind it. We financed their war against the Vietnamese.
And then we took it over.
Then we took it over, and de Gaulle said, don't do that. Don't go there.
Yeah.
And people forget who our ally was during World War II. I know it was Ho Chi Minh.
Yeah.
It
As a
wasn't
matter of
South
fact, the
Vietnam, it was Ho Chi
Vietnamese constitution is based, or much of it is based on the Declaration of Independence. He was an admirer of our Declaration of Independence, Ho Chi Minh. And yeah.
But the Vietnam War changed the attitude towards our veterans. Joe, what do you think it was about the Vietnam War that changed attitude towards it? What was happening that
Oh,
it was a
it's,
complete change?
what Jack said is that
I was confused. I was in my 20s and I was
what
really
Jack
confused.
said is right. There was no division between the people that fought and the war itself. You know, a lot of those people that went to Vietnam were volunteers. They believed in the cause. I believed in it, but as soon as I got there, I realized, oh no, something's wrong here. This is not about fighting communism. There's a civil war going on, and we shouldn't be here. I realized that right away. You couldn't leave, though. But when we came home, we were like, we were the war. They couldn't separate us from the war. And they treated us like we were, like we were the people that made the decisions to put it. I mean, we were treated terrible.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
It's
And
awful.
Well, there was so much sentiment against the war because of the draft. And,
so
and-
they didn't treat us well at all.
no.
So when we came back, nobody welcomed us really at all. I'm telling you, there were no parades, there were no ceremonies, there was no speeches, and
Some of the soldiers had to change back into their civilian clothes before they left the army base. Because they were afraid that
My
they would
brother's
be
a Vietnam
insulted
vet.
and attacked. They were called baby killers and so on. It was just one of the blackest stains in American history, that period.
they
and the
treated us
treatment of
like
our
we were
soldiers.
responsible for the war. We weren't responsible.
Yeah, my brother's a Vietnam vet, and he was so embittered by how he was treated that when people said, "What did you do during the war?" he said, "I dropped bombs and killed babies." He would just say that because he was so angry at being accused of that. So he would just say it.
Well,
and it was awful.
The generation that came home from the Second World War, it seemed to me that some of them talked about it, most didn't, and that was part of the aura of being, a hero.
Mm-hmm.
You do it and you don't discuss it, or and when I came home, we were convinced. I was convinced. You don't mention this to anybody. And nobody wants to hear it, and nobody cares about it. So there was most vets just, that's it. They'll talk to one another, and the same thing happened to me. I didn't talk about it for over 30 years at all. Over
My
30
brother
years.
too was the same situation. You couldn't pry it out of him. But you have some documents here that you
This is
wanted
the
to
same.
share with us.
When I got out of the Marine Corps, I was almost 4 years. I was an enlisted man, and I went from private all the way up to captain. But when I got out, I decided, before I got out, I decided I'm going to law school. So I applied for my GI benefits, right? To get this, you had to be fully matriculated at a college or in graduate school. I guess law school is sort of a graduate school.
Oh, yeah.
And this was the total benefit you got after serving, right? This is the total benefit per month. $205 a month to cover everything, nothing else.
Wow.
Cover everything, tuition, books, food, rent, transportation, $205 a month. Then, by chance, my wife got pregnant. It wasn't planned for. We had a child, and it went up to $230 a month.
Wow.
This didn't even cover my tuition. So, as a result, what did I do? I went to work. I worked full-time, and went to law school full-time. I worked. But this is a disgrace.